Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Gooner Ramble. We are joining you a day after a very, very disappointing performance against West Ham. Some would say a hangover-inducing performance, but one person that may not be suffering a hangover due to dry January would be Akhil.
Yeah, about that.
About that? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I broke it yesterday.
Oh!
To be fair, I started it on the 2nd as well. So I thought, well, I've done 10 days, which is good. So I thought
10 days does not make a January, does it?
No, but it makes a dry 10 days, which I thought was quite impressive. I did have a brandy for medicinal purposes actually on the 5th. But
so now we're narrowing the window to the 5th to the 12th.
If you remember last week, I was kind of suffering, and I thought a brandy will kind of help me there. So, but in my eyes, I did a dry 10 days, which I think is a great effort.
It is. Watching Arsenal is enough to make anyone drink.
Well, exactly.
Yes.
So, I mean, to be fair, I decided yesterday I was breaking it. So I had one about 10 o'clock at King's Cross before we got to Stratford. But I think even if I didn't, I'm pretty sure I would have had one after.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So it broke the dry January. And the other voice you heard is Tim Payton from, he works on the board of the Arsenal Supporters Trust with Akhil. How are you doing, Tim?
Hello.
And obviously very, very prominent on Twitter, much and not always loved and adored. Have you had any run-ins lately?
Well, I do wonder whether Ivan Gazidis is still using that secret account to follow me, because obviously I don't get the phone calls complaining anymore. But I bet he is still watching, and definitely I've had his number for a long time, but my God, is it coming in now? Hello, Ivan. Hello.
You always upset people. I think the allocation thing, which we're going to talk about later, I'm sure you upsetted a few when I had a quick look at the Twitter the other day. Everyone's got natural ability. Mine is to drink JD. Yours is to just piss people off on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, there's a few deluded people out there.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll get more into that.
All right. And we have one, probably the least deluded person on our podcast this week is...
Someone sensible.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chloe is joining us again. Lifelong Arsenal fan, season ticket holder. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. And I'm still very much in the clutches of dry January and intend to keep it that way.
Yeah. Well, might bring some sanity to this whole podcast.
Yeah, finding success where Akhil failed. Okay.
But I mean, Chloe, dry 10 days is still good effort, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. So,
yes,
Akhil,
yeah.
you made the trip to West Ham.
Yeah.
How bad was it?
Well, put it this way, I much preferred Sir Mo Farah, Jessica Ennis, or Ennis Hill, but she wasn't Ennis Hill at the time, to be fair. But anyway, I much preferred watching them at the Olympic Stadium. I mean, firstly, it's not a football stadium. I absolutely hate watching football there. But we've been there 3 times since it opened. We've actually won once, lost once, and drawn once. And even the year when we won, I think it was 5-1 when Sanchez scored a hat-trick, I still didn't enjoy the football there. It's just, I don't know, there's something about it. There's like 70-odd rows. If you're at the top, you can't see a thing. So I normally go into there quite miserable anyway, because I just don't believe it's a football ground. But then once we got in there, it didn't really, my mood didn't really change. I mean, it was just, I don't know, you always felt like we were going to go one down in that game. Even when we saw a couple of chances that we missed, you always felt that there's just something, it just doesn't look right today. You kind of looked at that starting lineup and you kind of questioned why Torreira didn't start. Maybe he's carrying an injury, but if he isn't, he hasn't played for 11 days? He didn't play at Blackpool.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah, but he hasn't played for 11 days, and the next game is still 6 days away. So, I don't know. It was a little bit bizarre for me, but maybe he's carrying an injury, and maybe that will come out. But yeah, no, I was concerned actually. I obviously I love our front 2 with Lacazette and Aubameyang, or front 3. But I just thought in that midfield, do we have enough creativity? And I think it was shown. So. Yeah, it was one of those where I just wasn't sure. I thought we could maybe, defend well, which I know that sounds funny for Arsenal, but, flukily defend well and maybe, rely on Aubameyang to get a goal and we could maybe nick the game. But yeah, it just didn't happen for us, unfortunately.
Yeah, it looked like chances galore, and each team playing rather similarly, creating chances on one end and giving up chances on the other. Chloe, what did you make of the match? Was it a bad performance on our part, or was it just West Ham playing a very good game?
I think it was a mixture of both, actually, because I have to give credit where it's due. West Ham appeared to be quick and they were pressing forwards and they just didn't seem to allow as much time on the ball. But we just weren't creative. It felt like we lacked control in the midfield, and dare I say it, but I genuinely believe that we missed Ozil yesterday. I really do. I'd love to see what he would have brought to the game, because I think it was that bit of creativity and the fact that, he'll get himself into pockets, very intelligent thinking and push forward and sort of link everything up. And I just felt that was missing, considering obviously who we had up front. We need those balls to be going in, and that was really what was lacking for me yesterday.
Yeah, and Tim, maybe we can go to you as well, get some thoughts on not only what was lacking from the game, but what you thought about our lack of finishing specifically.
Well, the finishing is, or the players playing up front, is one of these issues of this totally lopsided squad, and it's all over the place. I mean, you do not play those two strikers in the same team. Not if you want a balanced team. They're being squeezed in because he's got two world-class players in those positions. He's got about 8 positions where he hasn't got anywhere near to world class, and it was the mess up. Last January is going to cost Arsenal for 5 years. The waste of money on the Ozil contract, the waste of money on taking Mkhitaryan in for Sanchez and paying him more money and getting a player like that. And then, although Aubameyang is a very, very good striker, spending 60 million on a world class striker when you already had one, doubling up on the wages. And then look at what you end up with in central defence and some of the midfield positions. It is such an unbalanced squad, and that really showed up, didn't it? The comments that have already been made were right. That team was just totally unbalanced at West Ham.
Okay, Tim, staying with you then. What do you think Emery needs to do to get us playing again? Is it personnel? Is it getting players back from injury? All the above?
I think it's really difficult, and I think he's getting cornered, because I think he's starting to recognise the long-term challenge, and that's probably why Ramsey isn't in there, because Ramsey is going, so he's starting to think about building and planning without him. Whether it's the right thing or not, but clearly Ozil isn't for him, and I don't know where you take this one. On the one hand, I would agree. I think his attitude, his approach, what he's paid, it's not good enough. But on the other hand, he is at the club. He's paid a lot of money. He can at times do something that is a bit special or a bit different. You just have to plough on with it till the end of the season, because it's like cutting off your nose to spite your face by not having him there. But I think Emery is stuck between having this unbalanced squad, players that aren't good enough or got the right attitude, and yet trying to desperately scramble into the Champions League. So he has a bit of money to rebuild things, and it's going to be a real challenge now in the next few games for him, because if he loses at home to Chelsea at the weekend, then it's almost like Champions League top 4 is over. And what do you do? Is it about trying to get enough results to keep a sort of fan base happy and confident, or are you totally beginning this rebuilding exercise? I do feel sorry for him, because I think he inherited a right dog's breakfast.
Oh, so Akhil, continue on that route. Knowing that they've announced that there's not a lot of money to spend in January, it might be loans only. What is your outlook there for what Emery needs to do?
Yeah, I mean, I've never had a dog's breakfast, so I'm not sure what that tastes like. But I mean, we talked last week about. I mentioned how January was such a turning point for this football club, because you had the power pretty much taken away from Arsene Wenger. And it pretty much went to Ivan Gazidis, and then obviously all the people Ivan Gazidis has employed, so Sven Mislintat, and then obviously Raul came in February, but you would presume he was doing a little bit of work in January as well, and obviously those kind of decisions were made then, and then Ivan Gazidis went, and I would have loved to known that if, obviously we potentially, we didn't know Unai Emery was going to come in, but I would have loved to known what Unai Emery would have done, because maybe the Ozil contract, the Mkhitaryan for Sanchez and signing Aubameyang, it was pretty much done without a football manager involved. Because we know Arsene Wenger wasn't involved because he was going.
I think what it was, Akhil, what it was, and sometimes they get criticised for not having ambition and spending money, but I actually think they rolled the die. I think they gambled on spending a bit of money and hoping that it would carry them into Champions League last year, because they desperately need to be in Champions League for that income stream. And I think they did gamble a little bit, and they were also cornered, weren't they? I understand why when you're losing Sanchez that you panic and you think we can't lose Ozil at the same time, because that would have felt psychologically like such a blow for the two big players, and actually they got in effect held to ransom by Ozil's agent. But I do understand how it happened. But in many ways, I am sure they knew that Wenger was going, or in Gazidis' mind, he wanted to move him on by then. And to spend all that money when you had such uncertainty over who your manager would be 5 months later. I said it a few minutes ago, didn't I? And I think we'll be paying for that January for several years, because it's going to be really difficult to unwind.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the solution would have been for the Sanchez thing. Obviously, with the Aubameyang thing, you can choose not to buy him, but with the Sanchez thing, it potentially we were in a little bit of a corner. But as I said, when you make decisions that without really a football manager involved, you're taking a big risk.
Should have taken the 40 million off City, because what you'd have had then was 40 million, and you wouldn't have had a Mkhitaryan on 220k a week, which you're also stuck with, because you do not sign players at that age on those wages expecting any resale value. And that's why we've compounded the problem, because they're just going to sit there for 2 or 3 years on these wages as they basically head into retirement.
Yeah, well, certainly for the summer, there's a massive rebuilding process, and sort of back to your original question, Rick, about kind of what now
stuff,
we do, and the short term, kind of near term. It's all about getting the best out of our players. So it's get our injured players back, which thankfully we're starting to get back. We saw Hector Bellerin come on. I think that Ainsley Maitland-Niles has done a decent job, to be fair. But I think Hector Bellerin coming in just adds a little bit. It's a bit more familiar. I think Nacho Monreal's another that we need back in the team. I'm not a huge fan of Kolasinac. I think I think there's a few players actually that started the season well, and you thought, well, actually they're different under Emery, and I think Kolasinac was one, Mustafi's another, Xhaka, Iwobi as well. But I think all of them have just stalled a little bit as our results kind of have started to kind of go backwards. I think having Bellerin back will be big. And then, I mean, by the way, what I say about Iwobi, but I actually thought Iwobi was probably the only one that can actually leave the London Stadium with a bit of credit yesterday. Yeah, it didn't work for him. He did give the ball away, but he tried to make something happen. He tried to be creative. He would try and take his man on. He knows that, that little bit of advantage can create a goal. Yeah, he missed a chance on his left foot, which you really want him to be able to take those, and you want him to, his final third, his end product needs to improve. We know that. But in terms of actually trying to make something happen, he was the only one. I thought Ramsey as well when he came on, but obviously that's a little bit different as well. And as Tim rightly says, Emery's now thinking about the future. But I think Chloe's spot on. I think Mesut Ozil is the key. We watched, I'm presuming we all watched Spurs Man United today, and we saw that Pogba ball to Rashford for the goal. That was the difference in the game. All right, maybe David De Gea and all his saves. But in terms of offensively for Man United, that was the difference. It was a little bit of quality in midfield. And I didn't see that yesterday at all. Xhaka's got the ability to pick out a ball, pick out a pass, but he got hooked after 50, 60 minutes yesterday. Torreira can actually, bring the ball forward. He's good in transition. But he's got so many different roles. He's got so many, he has to cover the ground. He has to anticipate danger. He's got so much to do that I think we miss a Mesut Ozil. I thought Aaron Ramsey actually did a decent job trying to do what Ozil tries to do, but we desperately need to bring him back. We need to try and get the best out of him, even if it's just till the summer. We have an asset there, that that can fill that hole, and we really need to do that. And if that's changing the formation, as Tim says, not playing both strikers, just playing one, playing Ozil, but maybe two midfielders behind him, so he's a little bit more free and creative, so be it. But we really need to find that creativity back in this team. And we all work, we all have things. You'll all have people that potentially aren't up for it or whatever, but you're stuck with them. You can't hire anyone else because you don't have a budget. You have to make something happen. You need to make it work, and that's what I think Unai Emery needs to do. Because I look at that team and I think, we've got rid of Jack Wilshere, we've got rid of Santi Cazorla. Where is the creativity in that team? It is Mesut Ozil, to a certain extent, Mkhitaryan, lesser extent maybe, but it is Mesut Ozil. So Unai Emery needs to make it work. I don't know how he does that, but he just needs to.
So, Chloe, some agreement with you on missing Ozil, but beyond Ozil, what do you think Emery needs to do to get this team playing again?
I think this is a really difficult question, if I'm honest, because I'm genuinely not sure at the moment. I think the Ozil thing is key, just to touch on that a little bit more. And I've almost come full circle with Ozil now, because I've always been a big fan and a big supporter of his. But I have now found myself in that camp of we're paying him a lot of money each week. And as you've all said, we need to actually make that work for us. And not having him in the squad, not having him on the pitch is definitely not doing that. But I genuinely don't know, because to bring back to one of Tim's earlier points, we've got an unbalanced squad. We've got some players that aren't good enough. We've got some players that are costing us a lot of money, with contracts still to run. And so we're kind of stuck with them to an extent. And I think that what's also sort of muddied the water somewhat is that we've had this fantastic run, and it's been brilliant because everyone's been more positive, everyone's been more confident. It's obviously put us in a strong position in terms of, how we've actually been doing in the league, better than I think any of us could have imagined. But I think it's also brought a bit of a false sense of security, because that wasn't going to continue, unfortunately, as much as we would have loved it to, not with this squad in the current, formation. And I think now we get to the hard bit, where it is almost going to be on a game-by-game basis. How do we dig out those results? How do we make sure that, we nick those wins when we need to? And when you think about what we're going into, which I know we're probably going to talk about in a bit more detail later on, we've got two really, really big games coming up.
Yeah, yes.
And I honestly am sitting here and don't have a valid suggestion as to what we do.
Yeah, and let's go back to Tim for a second. When we're talking about what Emery needs to do to get this team playing again, maybe Emery is looking a little longer term, knowing that there's little to be done in January. We may not be good enough, quite frankly, based on the performance we've seen recently, to get that top four. Who do you think is he auditioning players? Is that why Guendouzi's getting so much time? What do you think, as far as players go, who's going to be around next season?
Well, we know that Ramsey won't be.
True.
And that is the dilemma, isn't it? Because do you not use him because you're sort of auditioning players, getting younger players coming through more and their chance? Or do you say, no, we need to use Ramsey because you've still got to hold some confidence together and get better results? Similarly,
he's got a great attitude, though, hasn't he, Ramsey?
Yeah, he has got a fantastic attitude, and I'm surprised that he's not being used more, almost as much as Ozil. But on the Ozil case, it's almost like he's trying to force him out. And I actually think that would be fantastic for Arsenal, because if you could take that off the wage bill, then it is a big step forward. But if it's not going to happen, and Ozil and the agent strike me as they'd be very happy to sit there for a year or two and pick up that amazing wage. He enjoys his playboy lifestyle in London and everything else. So if you're not going to force him out, then probably in the short term, you have to be practical and actually use him and get what you can out of him until, there is the time to offload. To have kind of almost gone to war type situation to take the player on, it's quite high risk, because I don't think you're going to move him on. You're not getting the benefit in the squad, and everyone's getting unsettled. But these are the big calls he's going to have to make, and you can replicate that with two or three other decisions. It could really, we've seen these games coming up, and I really think it could get messy in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I know I've always been a fan of Ainsley Maitland-Niles, and I don't like the way our midfield is balanced right now. Like you were talking about an imbalanced team. I think we got an imbalanced midfield specifically, and I was kind of always holding out hope that Maitland-Niles would gravitate towards that central position, but he doesn't seem to be doing quite that much to kind of put pressure on Emery to make a decision on what to do with him. He hasn't really stood out. I mean, he's played well, but he hasn't really stood out. Akhil, do you think there are other players that are in that opportunity to audition for a role, much like Ainsley Maitland-Niles or?
Yeah. On that, I think you're actually spot on. I mean, Rick, I think in about a year of speaking to you, I think that's one of the best things you've ever said, Ainsley. that point. No. And the reason why I say that is I watched the game yesterday, and without Torreira, there was our transition from defence to midfield, defence to attack was absolutely shocking.
Just doesn't exist.
It doesn't. The problem last year we had is we actually transition really well, but then what would happen is we would just kind of be passing it around outside the box, looking for that sort of perfect ball in. And, we all remember the times with Ozil, Sanchez and co, where we would just have it outside the area, it would go wide, come back in, come back. The pressure would be on, but ultimately we probably wouldn't get anywhere outside the opposition box. But now it's our centre backs that have that ball. I mean, how many times did we see that? I would love to see the stats on that. How many Socrates to Koscielny, back to Socrates, back to Koscielny there were? Because I thought there was loads of them.
Basically, our arc of frustration has moved back to the back line, is what you're saying.
It has, and there wasn't the Torreira, what he was doing early on in the season when he was actually getting that ball and turning, because he's good enough to do that, and then transitioning over. You had, Guendouzi doing it, who, he's 19 years old. He wasn't playing in the top level last season. He needs time, and I do think we're overplaying him and we're overusing him, because he's pretty much had to replace, Wilshere and Cazorla in that squad. I know Cazorla didn't play much, but Wilshere, last season played more than he's done in years. So suddenly you're relying on a 19-year-old, and I think Torreira's obviously, still sort of getting to grips with the country, no winter break. So the pressure on Guendouzi is huge, and the pressure on Xhaka's huge. And I think we saw that yesterday when he didn't have a good game. So it's that transition that I'm just really struggling with. And Ainsley Maitland-Niles actually, he carries the ball really well. He travels with it really well. So actually, in the short term, would not be a bad shout at all with Hector Bellerin back at right back to actually play that midfield and actually transition it, because I think it may be a lot smoother. I actually think in a funny sort of way we're missing a player like Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, because he actually was doing that for Liverpool a little bit when he was fit before he got injured. And, without a player like that, without a Wilshere or Cazorla or a Torreira playing in that kind of way, we're really struggling. So I think that's a very, very good point. In terms of the audition, I think there's a few players. So I named a few of them that I thought actually, I can see they're actually really improving this year, who have just stalled a bit. So I think someone like Kolasinac is still on an audition. Mustafi's on an audition. I think Emery likes Xhaka. So I think he may.
Darn it.
I think he may be okay. He's been captain a few times as well, so I think he's okay. I think Iwobi he likes as well. I think Mkhitaryan will come back and be on an audition to a certain lesser extent, maybe even Lacazette, because we've seen a little bit of Emery and Lacazette just being a little bit, maybe that's just because Lacazette wants to play every minute and gets frustrated when he's not, which is good and natural. Yeah. But at times he's given a bit more than Aubameyang, but been taken off, so there is questions there. So there's a few of them in that audition stage. I think players like Niles, I think definitely have a long-term future. It'll be interesting to see if Mavropanos comes back in at all. Will we see him a little bit more? Socrates has obviously only been there 6 months, but there's a few players that are, I think, on auditions, because as I said last week, I'm not sure is Kolasinac and Mustafi playing because we've got nobody else and they have to play, or does Unai Emery actually like them? If he had a choice, would he be playing them? And I don't know. I don't think we know the answer to that, but we will in the summer.
And that's part of the challenge at the moment, isn't it? I think we can't actually determine that because of the injuries that we've had. And it's interesting because actually, when you think about Akhil, that's a lot of players that we think he's auditioning, which is actually, quite an anxious position to be in, I'd say.
Because I even think about Socrates, and
let's be honest about it. You use the word audition, you could almost substitute it for not sure about.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah. But actually, what that shows you is we can all there are 7 or 8 playing regularly at the moment who I do not think are players that play in title-winning sides.
Yeah.
Now, you're not gonna have that totally, but we do look at the moment. Like I see a lot of players that I think Europa League is probably their natural level, and that is the real challenge. And what do you do? Because people keep talking about the summer. It's going to be like what do they think is going to change?
Yeah, well, what's actually going to happen? That we're all sort of waiting for this utopia, but not really sure what it's going to be.
View that, exactly. Yeah. He is really stuck. I mean, Akhil and myself are on the AST board, and there are 1 or 2 colleagues alongside us who are really good at looking at the finances. And Arsenal are not in a good financial position. And they reckon at the moment that this summer they probably have about £40 million to spend, unless they can generate some from sales. Now, £40 million isn't going to replace your Aaron Ramsey, is it? £40 million is really tight to try and rebuild that squad. Or do you try and create a couple of sales? But it's really difficult to sell looking at that profile because you don't get money for the older players. Do you say, right, we have to sell one of Lacazette or Aubameyang because it doesn't make sense to have 2 strikers like that? But what we really need is to take the money for one of them so that we can buy a world-class central defender and get that squad a bit more balanced. But I just worry a little bit that people are going to think that there's going to be this massive rebuild in the summer, and the wage bill and the profile of players we have and the lack of money we have, it is going to be really tough.
Here's a question for you, Tim, then. Looking at the finances, looking at probably this season as well, here's a scenario. We regardless of if we beat Chelsea or lose to Chelsea, if you got a 20-25 million bid in for Aaron Ramsey, do you sell him? Thinking, we might leave ourselves short, but then what's the difference between 6th and 7th or 8th? What really is the difference? Couple of million quid. Would you sell him?
I think I would. I would. What you probably have to make that call on is, will it make the difference of getting in the Champions League or not? Because that is all this season has got to offer Arsenal, hasn't it? That's now the outcome that we can aim at. And let's also remember that I don't think people realise, if we get into the Champions League through the Europa League particularly, it's arguable it doesn't make you any money. Because what they do in effect is they shoehorn you into the English pool of TV money, but they only give you 10% so that the other 4 don't lose out too much. So if you get in through the Europa League, you probably earn less money than if you qualify for the Europa League with all those games that at least churn out the gate receipts for all those tickets people buy and don't go to, and some of the TV money. I mean, maybe if you get to the semi-finals or finals of a Champions League, you can make some big money. Yeah. But it's not really gonna change things. So I digressed a bit there. But I think you might have to start thinking about who are 1 or 2 players that you probably it might surprise you if I said, do you sell them? But do you have to start thinking about that to create the rebuild? Otherwise, how are you going to do it? Or you give players away just to take them off the wage bill.
Yeah, I mean, on the Ramsey thing, I mean, Chloe, I don't know what you think, but on the Ramsey thing, I think of that as I would love to keep him because I think we're short. But then, the difference in the league, it's unlikely we'll get 4th now. And we could win the Europa League. But then, by the time the semis and final comes, April, May, will someone like Aaron Ramsey who's leaving, and he is a professional, no doubt. But it's natural, isn't it? That if you're leaving, going to another club, you don't want to get injured. You don't want to, do anything that might jeopardize the move, even if it is signed, it's just, suddenly does that start playing on your mind as well? I mean, it might not with Ramsey, I don't know, because he does seem pretty professional compared to most. But I mean, Chloe, what would you do if there was a bid that came in?
I think we'd have to take it where, back to your point, if it is looking very unlikely that we're going to get in that top 4, which I recall the last time that I was on the Gooner Ramble, I was very buoyant about the fact we were going to hit fourth place, but I certainly don't feel like that at the moment. And we've got to be ruthless, because I think if you know you're not going to hit fourth place, then it becomes more of a commercial business decision, and it's with sadness and regret that I think, you know, he's got to go. You get to a point where you perhaps do have to realise your best assets. I think, unfortunately, as well, the ship has sailed. He's been absolutely professional. I think he's really, really been a great ambassador as an individual in the way he's conducted himself. But ultimately, at this point now, we know he's going. He's waiting to go. And I think we just have to let that happen when the time comes.
Yeah. And we've got to be realistic that he's in charge now. So
yeah, absolutely.
This idea that kind of we can sell him, well, I very much doubt it, because the club that's going to take him and will be speaking to him will say, well, just wait for May and we'll get you free. And that's part of the deal of why we can give you a signing on fee. So I think the chances of finding a club that he would A, want to go to, and B, would be prepared to spend the money for the sake of 4 months is incredibly slim. And I have to say, that takes you back really into Gazidis and Wenger, but particularly Gazidis. What on earth are they doing, letting a player like that get into this contractual position?
And moving on to other potential sales in the summer, how, if Emery does not trust Ozil, he's not part of our plans, how do we move a player that's on that kind of contract?
Well, you probably pay another club to take him.
That doesn't help us rebuild, does it?
No, but it might do, because if you're paying 350k a week, if you have to give another club, let's say 100k a week, but that frees up 250k a week from your wage bill for a player that the manager isn't going to use, then that's still a saving that allows you to move forward. But, you know, it's tough. But
not ideal. But yeah.
Which club is going? What club in the world is going to come in for a 30-year-old Mesut Ozil, pay a transfer fee, and pick up 350k a week? It ain't happening, is it?
Well, I mean, you could argue the reason why he got the contract and stayed was because there was a lack of interest in him. I think he wanted to stay. I think he likes London, but we didn't hear many rumours about clubs really wanting him. There was a couple in Turkey and China, but you know, who else in Europe?
Which is why we panicked when we gave him that contract, because there wasn't really anyone else coming. Although he could have let it run down, and someone would have definitely taken it.
Yeah, maybe.
Talent with no transfer fee. But, you know, you're right, Akhil. I think that is a player who, sadly, in my mind, is now winding down for retirement on an amazing contract and will sit tight. Why would he go there?
Well, just because they'll pay him what he wants, maybe.
Well, but are they going to pay? You know, are they going to? Even in China, I'm not sure they pay more than 350k a week. It's an astronomical wage that has a huge impact on what Arsenal can do. But, you know, and the agent basically came out and went, tough luck, he's staying, didn't he, last week?
Yeah, he did.
It was, to paraphrase what the agent said, was tough shit, he likes the money.
So, Tim.
And of course that then doesn't help, does it? Sorry, Rick, but that then doesn't help with the way that, you know, the fans feel about him and all of that speculation. And when they make big gestures like that, it just continues to sort of breed the negativity, etc.
I agree, and I think there's also a negativity that we don't see that is even bigger, that all the other players see it and feel it, because they all know what each other get paid, and there's, you know, it's like our office place is on a bigger scale, so there's resentment about that, and then they know he's not really necessarily working that hard to get back and where it's going on. It's why I think that although it might be painful, Arsenal might have to bomb him out just to move forward.
Well, it's for that long-term strategy piece, isn't it, Rob?
George Graham, showing my being an old git here, but George Graham did it much more successfully with Charlie Nicholas, where there was the same issue. But he actually used him much more until he bombed him out, if you know what I mean. But moving Charlie Nicholas out was part of a way of saying, I'm changing the approach and attitude at this club. And I think probably that's what Emery wants to do with Ozil. But we're now in this post-Bosman age whereby the player is the king, not the manager anymore.
Yeah.
So I think, and also using them keeps their value up as well. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Ozil's value is completely. If not many people are interested in him earlier last January, they're not going to be interested now a year on when he hasn't actually done much for a year. So I struggle with that. But again, I think, he's from everything we're hearing, he's not being disruptive or nothing like that. He's still, very close with the squad in terms of personnel. So you would think if you could use him, get the best out of him, there'll be no issues. Even if he is paid more, even if, whatever the case, I think he's very different to a Sanchez issue where, we all know Sanchez was a bit of a loner. He wasn't quite getting on. Him and Koscielny had that massive row, and most people took Koscielny's side. With Ozil, there is no impact there. So if Emery could get him fit playing again, then suddenly he could be an asset. Whether it's for 3 months, 4 months, short term, 1 year, 2 years, I don't know. But I think getting him playing again, it just has to happen. It just really has to happen.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. If we're not playing him, he's not in the shop window, and nobody's going to come in for him. So it seems we're kind of stuck. Speaking of stuck, Arsenal, looking at their finances, Tim, I know there's been a recent discussion about a loan. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, well, I think that what the discussion has been is that they will only do loan signings this transfer window. And I think some people perhaps are reading that as there's no money at all, and that's not correct. Although there's very, very tight money. I think the reason why they said loans only this January, I think it's partly a reaction to last January, which is don't panic. The worst thing of all would be to spend, let's say, 15 million on a player this January, that isn't great, but you think improves things slightly. But if you spend 15 million and let's say they come in at 100k, because that's the kind of wage that go with it, that's all money that you can't spend in the summer. And I think so it's partly from the hierarchy saying, no, we're not, we're not going to buy, this January because we need to settle in and really be focused and do the right thing in the summer when we can have a much wider pick of players. And they can't. What they cannot do, they cannot spend £40 million on a player this January. They have not got the money to do that. And it's questionable whether they can spend £40 million on a player in the summer, but they get a little bit of time to get there and work out where things are. It's not a pretty situation in terms of what they can do.
Akhil, I think you're well aware of this as well. What do you think Arsenal can or cannot do before the summer?
I don't know. It's a high wage bill. For Unai Emery to come out and actually say that, we're only looking at loans is obviously, it's quite a big thing. You're basically telling the world that you're not in a position to sell, to buy, sorry. I'm not sure. I think we may see an addition or two on loan, but I don't think we'll see massive amounts. I think
that's the right thing, Akhil.
No, it is.
If there is a player out there that they think would make a strong addition to Arsenal for the next 3 or 4 years in the first team, then they should try and buy them in January. But they're very few and far between. Yeah. And the signings that you do see, the transformational signings. Van Dijk was bought in the January transfer window, I think, wasn't he? But at what, 60 million? Aubameyang was bought, but at 60 million. Arsenal literally cannot do a signing like that. And as I say, don't do a stopgap. Don't sign a player at 12, 15 million this January if you think he's only half right for you, because that will stop you buying another player in the summer when you've got a much wider pick of people. So it's quite pragmatic. And the other thing I maybe ought to mention here, let's explain what's going on. Arsenal are making a loss of about 75 million this season. That's basically because the wage bill and the depreciation bill in effect is, the payments for transfers each year that you make. You put those two costs together and they're about 70, 80 million higher than the income that's coming in. Now, and next year, I'm not sure we'll get our income up significantly to get out of the loss-making situation. So it's really tough. They've got to reduce the wage bill and try and sign good value players that bring the club back up to Champions League. It is a tightrope. And, it might be too late. I fear that we're looking at 2 or 3 more years at least of Europa League before we manage to get a chance of getting back.
Well, that's a depressing thought.
It is, isn't it?
Oh, gosh.
You know, but the problem you have is that the way you get back in the Champions League is by spending more money, and we don't have it.
Yeah.
And Kroenke won't put it in.
I think there's a link there, isn't there, as well, between sort of that internal audit that we're talking about, the auditions, the players that, you know, I think the next, and the reason why probably loan signings are because, you know, Unai Emery does need to decide on, you know, Mustafi, Kolasinac, or who he's still unsure about. You need to decide if they're gonna work or not, because then you have to either think about moving them on or getting a replacement in. So it's silly buying a player who you think, oh yeah, he could add something, but then he's playing in a position where actually you haven't made your mind up on the existing player. So I think Emery needs time. I think what a lot of it will kind of depend on is Unai Emery getting a little bit more out of the players he's got, drilling them a little bit more strategically and tactically, and then just, you know, using his own kind of mind, his own kind of genius mind, to hopefully, you know, think of ways of getting the team playing. And he was doing that earlier on in the season. You know, that you can do it by drilling your own players, by looking at the opposition more. I think Unai Emery, as a tactician, as a coach, that's where our future kind of lies. It's not so much on the transfer market, so not so much that way. I think it's more about, you know, can I get 10% more out of Socrates? Can Koscielny still play? Can I make Bellerin into that world class right back that, you know, so many people think he can be? That's the key for me. Can I get Mesut Ozil back playing? All that.
And that's going to take a little bit of time, isn't it? And
of course,
it's the same as, you know, in our real lives and our working lives. You have a new boss come in and they have to get the measure of you and the team. And, you know, in some instances, they're in a position they can bring all of their favourite people with them. But often they're not in a position to do that. And it's a similar situation with Emery, isn't it? Yes. As you've all said, he's got to try these players out. He's got to get the measure of them. And I think as well that we've probably perhaps previously been in a situation where maybe loans has been the real objective, you know, with the odd exception. But I think the difference is that probably would have been masked before, because I don't imagine that Wenger would have been quite as explicit when asked that kind of question. He would have always given the impression that we were looking in the market. We had our eye on players. And then, you know, every so often someone would come.
The final day.
Exactly. And whereas I think Emery's just, you know, been very honest and very open. And it's not a huge surprise to me that we're not looking to do business. And certainly when you think about the finances, as we've all discussed, we're certainly not in a position to do anything major.
Yeah, I wonder if he was freelancing a little bit there, or to a certain extent,
he might have been
defending his own position. Because in a way, he's turned the pressure back onto the club, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And I think it's quite deliberate. I think that statement was made by him more as his way of saying, I've got a difficult job here, guys. Give me more time.
Yeah, get off my back.
Yeah.
And you know, it is a difficult job. I mean, that's the whole 22 games unbeaten. It didn't help him at all, because it raised expectations. And in a way, we're to blame for it a little bit, because we were, you know, as you rightly said, Chloe, last time you were on, we were talking on this podcast about actually expectations have now changed. That free year has turned into actually we can get fourth here. So it's kind of now the expectations have kind of gone the other way round again. But I mean, generally, it's a hard job. You know, people compare it, and you know, I love Arsenal Twitter as well, comparing it to kind of, oh well, Guardiola on his first year and Klopp on his first year didn't do that. But then obviously they then, you know, took a year or two and then spent a lot of money. But I just think it's a little bit different. And I look at someone like Marco Silva at Everton. You know, Everton wanted him for so long, and they were after him for a while when he was at Watford. But he's come in, and it's not all rosy. You know, it takes time. He's you know, having potentially issues there with Everton and results and stuff like that. And it's tough. You know, he's trying to get the best out of the players he's got, the same way Unai Emery's trying to get the best out of the players he's got. So, you know, I think if people think it's an easy job, they're certainly wrong. And Unai Emery needs time. And yeah, I think maybe it was a way of putting a bit of pressure on, just reminding everyone this is a tough job. I'm trying to, I'm doing it on no budget and I'm doing it with players who aren't mine. Because even, if the timelines are to be believed, Arsenal approached Unai Emery in the summer. Players like Socrates, Leno, Liechtenstein, even Torreira were pretty much, you don't just sign players like that overnight. The talks start generally early. And I think Ivan Gazidis, I remember one year in a Q&A did say that you're starting to discuss it with the clubs and stuff 3-4 months before. So you could argue the signings that Arsenal made in the summer weren't actually Unai Emery signings.
No, they weren't.
So
they weren't. They weren't.
So you've got exactly. So you've even got that kind of to sort out.
What a lot of people need to remember, Akhil, now is we've talked non-stop about the manager, but he's not even the manager. He's the head coach. And we have this tripartite system now with Raul Sanelli and Sven Mislintat. And it's, they do the signing of players. Yeah, they do a lot more of the strategy about the squad building. And I think it will take a while until we start realising that you've got to start questioning the decision making across the three of them. The day of the kind of the Wenger Fergie, like they're in charge of everything and you hold them accountable. And you're bang right. Those decisions taken last January weren't taken by, that was different because Wenger was on the way out. But this summer, those were not signings by Unai Emery. He may get a final yes, no type approach, but he's not got the same amount of autonomy or control as before. And I think increasingly we have to start looking at it about questioning the kind of collective decision making that is going on in the squad. And one of the things that concerns me a little bit, and they're quite clever in painting themselves as new boys, but it was Raul Sanelli who was there all summer. It was Raul Sanelli that was football director when Aaron Ramsey wasn't pinned down to a contract or sold in June. It's who do you actually hold responsible for the Ramsey situation? I mean, it happened above Unai Emery's head.
Yeah. And
you know what? It all seemed the Ramsey situation seemed to change immediately after Gazidis left. Is that coincidence?
Well, maybe not.
Well, you could say, but I might be speculating it a bit too further. It changed just after the change in ownership. No, the owner was the same, but we moved to 100% private. And I think there was actually that decision was taken by pressure on wage bill and money. And what we won't know for a while is whether Arsenal have got an even bigger problem on their hands, which is they're having to start to make management fees or dividend payments to Stan Kroenke. Could it be that the money that was earmarked for the Aaron Ramsey contract is now earmarked for dividend payments?
I think that's speculating.
It's definitely speculating, Akhil. Yeah. But if you actually want to tie it back to a change in approach, because what I can't understand is why you would sort of let Aaron Ramsey get into October and change your mind. The time to make your decision is June. You've either offered a contract that you're happy for him to sign. No, come on, that.
Well, yeah, no, maybe.
Happened, but it's gross incompetence by the people managing the club.
Well, we're losing an asset for free, so it's obviously it's not great. But I mean, at the same time, the head coach came in and potentially wanted to have a look at all his players, and on another day, another team, Aaron Ramsey might have worked out.
It doesn't make sense because even if the head coach is of the view that he doesn't particularly rate Aaron Ramsey, you still in October get him to sign that contract so that then you can sell him at the end of the year. Yeah, he's one of the players in our squad who you would have got good money for selling because he's still at the age and profile. So it absolutely didn't make sense not to get him to sign a contract because you lost the selling value. I think that was financial. That was financial. The way is too big.
As an agent as well, you would be telling Aaron Ramsey that, okay, well, they're trying to get you to sign one, but we're not sure if they fancy you, because Ramsey would know if Emery fancied him or not. And if he doesn't, he was not signing that contract. Why would he? Why would he stop himself from getting that big signing on fee and potential? But, would Juve have wanted him if he costed 50, 60 million? We don't know, maybe, but maybe not. So I don't think Aaron Ramsey would have signed it. But I mean, that whole kind of head coach signings, I think that's something to conclude this section. I think that's something that's going to be very interesting. And I'll give you one example why. Socrates was signed in the summer. I'm convinced Unai Emery isn't sure on Socrates, because when we were playing with the two, it was actually Rob Holding and Mustafi playing as a two. And there was times where I thought, Socrates, he had an injury, but then I thought, surely he's going to come back in, surely. But no, Mustafi and Holding played until we switched to a back three and Socrates came back. And that's just an example of why I think this whole head coach and having a director of football and a head of recruitment, it can work, but certainly you need to work on it, because if you're going to sign another player like Socrates, who the head coach isn't sure about, then I don't know how long it can continue. So the next kind of summer, I think it's going to be interesting just to see who makes those decisions, what sort of players we get, and how that kind of relationship works and how it grows.
Okay, so not a lot of expectations for movement in January, it sounds like, unless something falls in our lap. It's going to be a rather muted response to signing players or getting loans in, I'm thinking. So looking at the big games we got coming up, while we're probably not going to get anything in our Christmas stockings here in the January transfer window, Chloe, looking at Chelsea coming up and then Manchester United in the FA Cup coming up, what are your expectations and outlook for those games?
I'm very nervous, I have to be honest. I think the good thing that I can see is the fact that we've actually got a week until just under a week now till Chelsea, and then we've got a full week again with no travel. So in terms of training and everything, it's not going to be too disruptive, and we're not having to play a load of games on top of themselves. But I am really struggling to see how we can get a result from both of those games based on what I've seen. I'd like to think that the magic of the cup will sort of take us through, if I'm honest. So from my perspective, I think we'll just nick a win in the cup against United, but I am less confident about Saturday. I'd love to see us draw. I think there'll be goals because they will score and we won't be able to not concede. But sadly, I think there's a chance we'll get beaten on Saturday.
Okay, Tim, Chelsea, Manchester United coming up. What are your thoughts on that? And might you also be able to speak on allocation?
The allocation
issue. He's been banging on about it on Twitter for the last week, so you've got him started now.
Well, one of the reasons that they can't sell tickets for the game yet is they haven't resolved the issue of how many they'll give to Manchester United, and that is a dispute which I believe now has gone to the FA, because Manchester United have made a formal complaint on behalf of their fans that Arsenal aren't applying the rules, which is to give 15% of the ground to away fans. It used to be 20% in the FA Cup. And one of the reasons that the FA Cup was special over the years was you had this rule, and it meant a lot more away fans travelled, and it changed the nature of the atmosphere in the ground, and it was something that fans were much more invested in. And in recent years, and it's not just Arsenal, you've had clubs giving smaller allocations. Sometimes they're safety advisory groups, which is the local council and the police. They're kind of hiding behind them and decisions. But Arsenal are offering apparently only about 8.5%, almost half of the full allocation. And I think that's really poor. And when you speak out about it, people will get really tribal and go, it's almost like you have to defend Arsenal, whatever. I will challenge any club that doesn't offer the right allocation, because I think that as fans, we're all in it together, just like we fight for the £30 away ticket. We fight for the right to standing at games. We're in it together. This kind of zero sum. They give us less, we'll give them less, they give us less. What we're going to end up with, giving everyone naught each. What I want is a big United allocation in the ground, because that's right for the FA Cup and the atmosphere. And if it goes to a replay, and I think there's a strong chance it goes to a replay, I want Arsenal to have a very big allocation so we can take our support up to Old Trafford. And if we don't stand up for the right of fans and go to the games, I think it's just we'll see the continual decline of watching live football. So that's my point on the allocation. On the games, one of the reasons, I don't know, I'm with Zoe, I'm nervous about these games coming up, but I also think we must be due a good performance soon. I mean, we haven't had a good performance probably since the Spurs win. So I'm just desperately hoping that in one of these it will come through. I actually think it's more likely we'll get something against Chelsea than United. Partly, I think that he will play a weaker team against United than they will in equivalent, because I still think he'll be of the view that he's been instructed by the club that Champions League is what matters, and he'll be putting all his resources into the Premier League squads and also into the, when it comes back, the Europa run will be seen as more important than the FA Cup run because of the outcome at the end of it. So I just worry about that United fixture and the squad we'll play compared to them. It's going to make or break, I think, the feeling that people have towards Arsenal and the head coach this season across those next two games.
All right, Akhil, your thoughts, particularly around the ticket allocation and pricing of?
I think just, on the two games, I think it's kind of going to be huge. I think for the first time this weekend, we just heard a little bit of people questioning Unai Emery's kind of handling of Ozil and Lacazette. We heard them sort of, ask questions about the formation, the balance, the substitutions, the kind of a little bit of everything here. So I think he's under a little bit of pressure for the first time in his reign at Arsenal. So I think the two games are quite big. You lose them both, and people aren't going to be very happy. And ultimately, getting back into the Champions League is what you would think what's important. So in the FA Cup, like Tim says, if I see a weakened team, I sort of understand why. You don't want it because it's Man United. It's the FA Cup. We're at home. But from a kind of objective point of view, you would think the Europa League will be a lot more important. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a more stronger team away to Bartet than Man United at home, which I know it sounds bizarre saying it, but I wouldn't be surprised. On the actual game, the allocation stuff, it's one of those topics that are always, I always find it quite interesting because there's so many sort of external factors. And, with Arsenal, there's rumours that there's a bit of a design flaw, putting fans in the upper tier. We have done it before, by the way, but there are whispers that can't quite happen. So if they're in the lower tier, suddenly they're going to be they're going to take over the whole clock end, which then means our fans who are members who sit there can't sit there. And it does get a bit messy, but I think, rules are there to be respected. And generally, if everybody gives 15% of their capacity, you don't really have a problem. But it's when there's, the rules aren't black and white. And, I remember going to Old Trafford in the FA Cup. I don't think we got the 15%. Either. There might have been a genuine reason for it. I can't remember, but I just think it gets a little bit messy. But I think the positive is I think it's going to be a category B. People, when they're listening to the podcast, it may have already been announced as a category B, or it might even be announced as a category A. I don't know. But it does seem like it's going to be a B, which means, ticket prices from sort of £36, £37 to about £50 rather than kind of 66 as the cheapest or 65 as the cheapest. So that's good. That's good for red members. That's good for silver members. That's obviously good for away fans as well. And, I've got no doubt it will be a cracking atmosphere, regardless of how many Man United fans there are, whether it's kind of 5,000 or whether it's 9,000, at that kind of price on a Friday night as well, under lights. It's a really exciting game. So, I think hopefully we get a result against Chelsea, so we have a bit of confidence. I think we're getting players back as well, so it'd be nice to see some of them back. And yeah, I think it's just, as kind of Chloe says, there's not much travelling. We haven't got any games midweek. So, Unai Emery can analyse the opposition well. He can kind of, look into his own team and hopefully produce some sort of a tactical masterclass. We went to Chelsea at the start of the season and actually we found a flaw in them. And, that was kind of on Alonso's side. We were absolutely all over them for 20 minutes. But I think having lost to City and being away from home, we took our foot off the gas a little bit. Alonso then suddenly could look forward rather than back, and he went on and scored the winner. So I wonder how Unai Emery will play this. He hopefully has learnt lessons from that. And yeah, hopefully we can pull something off. They're not scoring as many goals as they were. So yeah, let's see. But, in terms of allocation, let's see what happens. But hopefully it is a category B, and that's great news for all.
All right. I equally, I think just like Tim, I think he's going to be more concerned about Chelsea than Manchester United. I don't know that he has any any pressure on him to win the FA Cup, and it might fall to the wayside in his quest for placing in the table and maybe finishing out Europa League. But like you said, there's no midweek games. There's no reason you have to rotate and rest people. So maybe he'll just go all in with both. We'll see.
I mean, just on that, he has squad rotated quite well this season. So, he does. Doesn't matter what the competition is. He's generally, we've seen players like Aubameyang playing the League Cup. We've seen him play in the Europa League, but we've also seen, younger players play in the Premier League as well. So I think he does kind of.
He has played though, Akhil, and he's played much stronger squads in Europa League than you might have expected. And also, but were needed because those group stages particularly, they are awful. And also Partey. I mean, I'm with you. I think he'll send a strong team out there because he's on this mission to win it because of the Champions League prize. But I went out there last year. I remember them well. They are awful. We probably have to save for the debate next time round that the home leg is going to be probably one of the worst games of football you'll ever see at the Emirates, because there'll be no one there because they're kicking it off at 5-6.
Yeah. Well, that's one for another day. But yeah, I mean, you expect the first leg to be the tide to be all over.
He'll play a strong team and they'll be 2 or 3-0 up, which is why I add to that fact that no one will show up at all for the second leg of 5-6.
Wow.
True. All right. Well, cautious optimism, but we're not expecting great things in the January window. But
But I mean, just finally, I mean, all that is kind of it's even if we lose our next 2 games, there's no question that Unai Emery is under that much pressure that we would even think about kind of getting rid of him or anything like that. That's one thing, because I think it has been a slightly negative.
But why, Akhil? Why?
Well, because I think he needs time. He needs to implement his own ideas.
What if there's someone better out there?
Was
it wrong to get rid of Bruce Rioch, who came 5th, and replace him with Arsene Wenger?
Well, there was, he had fallen out with Ian Wright, and there was,
and Emery's fallen out with Ozil.
Out with Ozil.
Maybe, but I'm still hopeful we'll see Ozil come back. I mean, it's you need to give players. I mean, I believe David Moyes should have been given more time at Man United, because he didn't quite have that time to implement his own ideas, get his own players in, and obviously there's a question mark at Arsenal. Has he got the finances to get his own players in? But, it would be good to see, if Dennis Suarez does come on a loan and he, whoever else he identifies in the summer, it would be good to see him kind of with them. It would be good to see him, work on some of our players. He clearly likes players like Iwobi and Xhaka, work with them for a year and develop them, rather than kind of just, get rid of someone who hasn't quite had the time. So no, I'm a bit of a loyalist like that, and always have been. I want him to get time. I want him to really get a chance at this football club. And the reason why I say that is, start of the season, we didn't have many expectations. We thought, well, yeah, let's try and get into the Champions League. But really, he's got a bit of a free run this year. Or certainly I thought he's got a free run this year. Expectations changed on that 22 match unbeaten run. But I think, again, I've just brought myself back down to earth and thought, actually, this is a free run again. I'm hoping that we'll get a few good performances. Be great to win a cup. Absolutely great to win a cup. But really, I think after 22 years of Arsene Wenger, I think whoever the new man was needs a little bit of time and needs to implement their own ideas. And I hope he'll get that.
All right. Well, I think that might wrap it up for us today. Chloe, where can people find you on Twitter?
So I am Tronny Tweets.
Tronny Tweets. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Any parting optimism you can give us?
Quick prediction for Chelsea?
I'm going to say 2-1 Chelsea and hope that's what happens.
I asked for optimism. That's what I get.
with ironically, with Olivier Giroud scoring the winner.
It'd be magical, wouldn't it?
Because that would highlight last January again, wouldn't it? But,
gosh. All right, Tim.
Sorry, I'm out of optimism tonight, guys.
Tim, rescue me. Do you have any optimism for Chelsea?
For Chelsea, I think there'll be a little bit of a bounce and a fight, and he recognises what's happened. I think it will be 1-1.
Okay, and where can people find you on Twitter, Tim?
Just at my name, Tim Payton.
All right, I am Rick. You find me at Golf and Gooner. I am remaining optimistic against Chelsea. I'm not sure what to expect against Manchester United. Akhil, your Twitter handle. Where do people find you?
10 Akhil on Twitter. and I'm going for a 2-2 draw.
2-2 draw. Okay. Well, thank you all for listening to us. Please subscribe and stay tuned and look for us in upcoming weeks. And Akhil, what do we say?
Up the Arsenal!